The Jesse Blake Sports Report with Jesse Blake.
The NHL world is going crazy right now. There's been so many transactions on this Saturday morning while I'm recording. Rounds 2 through 7 of the NHL draft are taking place, and the GMs are just all together having fun. Tanner Jeannot's been moved. Sergachev's been moved to Utah, who is loading up. They also got Marino. Kevin Hayes is a Pittsburgh Penguin. I don't know what Kyle Dubas is doing. Logan Thompson was traded in the middle of his autograph session in Vegas. He was moved to Washington, and they were just like, okay, we'll make this transaction. We don't care that you're lined up with fans right now signing autographs. So everything is happening in the NHL world. And because of that, us fans who follow the Blue Jays and the NHL world, the Blue Jays have kind of skirted under the radar. But it has been a wild, 12 hours in Blue Jay land. So we're going to do Tim Mayza, Jordan Romano, Yusei Kikuchi, we'll talk about him a little, and I got to get to Bichette's comments that I keep teasing and haven't gotten to. But let's start with Tim Mayza and just the overall. Oh, and George Springer as well. So there's 5 things we need to cover here. George Springer as well, leaving the game yesterday, which is kind of just the news, but we'll get to that. Tim Mayza. Tim Mayza's got to be the focus here because he was DFA'd this morning. He was sent down to the Myers. Jose Qua was called up, who the Blue Jays picked up on waivers from Chicago. He's been called up in replacement for Tim Mayza. And Tim Mayza is he's wasted any value the Blue Jays could have got in a trade for him at the deadline in a couple of weeks, because now that he's been sent down and he's going to be called up eventually, when he gets his stuff back, maybe in August or something, or late July, he's going to be called up. It's going to be too late to trade him. And he's on a 1-year deal that he signed last offseason. So Tim Mayza is going to play out the string here with the Blue Jays. I don't think he's going to get everything back together. Who knows? He could, but at this point, you don't bring back Mayza next year. So we're seeing the last run of Tim Mayza in a Blue Jays uniform, which is kind of, I didn't expect this at all. I thought he was going to be a staple of the bullpen, and the Blue Jays bullpen has completely fallen off this year. Tim Mayza last year had a 1.35 ERA. I think that's what he finished. 1.52 ERA. He was one of the most reliable relievers in all of baseball. That was in 53 innings pitched. And this season, his ERA is sitting at an 8. And if you just take last night, if you looked at last night, the 5 runs on 5 hits, no outs. You can't have somebody in your bullpen when they can't get a single out. And he's been a complete 180 from what he's been last year. I don't understand where his stuff is gone. From one of the best relievers in the game to one of the worst in one off season. It seems to be a trend with some of these Toronto Blue Jays performances this year. Let's transition to Bichette, who told Hazel May on Wednesday. We got to go back all the way to Wednesday for these comments that I haven't gotten to yet, but we are getting to now. Hazel May tweeted, spoke to Bichette about the trade rumors and deadline talk. I asked him whether he'd be surprised if he were moved at the trade deadline. No, not surprised at all, said Bichette, which is the correct answer because he's very realistic about where the club is right now. And they did follow up with Bichette afterwards about those comments, and he said, my goal here is to win, obviously. And obviously you're not going to be shocked if you're moved at this point. But my mind for Bichette and the transition with Tim Mayza falling off through a great last year and Bichette, they parallel each other because Bichette, the 2 years in his career, in 21 and 22, led the league in hits. This is a guy who knows how to hit. And this season, his hitting has disappeared. And there's a lack of answers from Atkins and Shapiro on the performances that have fallen off a cliff. And Bichette is amongst that. Bichette is a player who was on pace to be up there in hits in the American League once again last year, but he was injured. And this season, the hitting hasn't been there. And there's just so many questions as to whether what we're seeing now is going to be these players of the future, or if this is a blip on the radar because of some exterior factors. Vladdy, who's turned it around late and has been hitting, he's been ridiculous. He's on a great streak right now. And you say, okay, what Vladdy was at the beginning of the season isn't who he was. This is who Vladdy is. So with Bichette, I think because you have the time, you use it. Bo Bichette is under contract for one more season after this season. I don't think you move on from Bichette or Vladdy this year at the deadline. I think you hold on to those pieces because you have the time. You don't need to trade them now. Obviously, if you move them now with another year of control, the package you get back in return will be greater than if you move them next trade deadline for only that little rental piece for a couple months. But I don't think the bonus prospects that you're going to get or major league talent that you're going to get at that point right now, as opposed to trading them next season, is worth moving off of Bichette just in case he turns everything around. And then if you need to move him next year, you can probably get a whole lot because he's good. So on the Bichette trade front, I say you sit. You don't move him this trade deadline, but next year you reevaluate and you see where it's at. Plus, I don't want this is just me being honest. I don't think I'm a fan of Atkins being the guy to make the Bichette deal. I think if things keep trending the way they are, they move on from general manager Ross Atkins in the offseason, and you have the new GM with Mark Shapiro probably still the president making that deal next trade deadline. But hopefully they don't have to because they're starting 2025 season off great, and there's no reason to trade Bo Bichette. So I say hold on to Bichette for one more year, play out the string, take the time that you have, keep him on the roster and see what happens. But guys, you do need a trade. Perfect transition again. Yusei Kikuchi had a great start last night in terms of just pure stuff. On the numbers front, like he picked up a loss, he allowed a couple runs. The stuff itself that Yusei Kikuchi has is fantastic. And at some point this year, Yusei Kikuchi will be playing for a team in October. He is a must-trade asset at this point for the Toronto Blue Jays. And like I say at this point, it's going forward. Going forward, they need to move off of Yusei Kikuchi and retain some assets. I'm not sure. I don't think it's necessarily deep prospects that you need to go and get. Probably major league ready prospects who I think a retool for 2025 is the best avenue to go for this team, not a complete teardown. It's got to be some sort of retool where you're still trying to be competitive, but you take the rest of this year off and you get everything set up for next year. Those are the assets you need to get in return for Kikuchi. But it's imperative. It is imperative that Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins move Kikuchi at this deadline because he's a free agent. You're going to get a draft pick if he leaves just in free agency. Okay. But you want those trade assets from that contender. And he's going to be like the second or third best pitcher available. And he needs to be available. We have enough time to know that to make the playoffs at this point, it would require a ridiculous run by these Toronto Blue Jays. I'm talking like 8 wins in a row, 10 wins in a row, some sort of streak like that in the next couple weeks. And we see that they are not capable of that. Kikuchi is one of their best trade assets that they have right now. I absolutely, if they don't move Kikuchi in the next 4 weeks, I don't even know what level of failure that will be in asset management for this team. So that's where I'm sitting at with that. And lastly on the list, George Springer. Just to note, George Springer left the game yesterday. And it's so disappointing to see George Springer leave the game yesterday because he's been hitting so well. And see him get everything back together. And he's one of the worst hitters in the league all season long. And for the last 3 games, he's been great. And then last night, he was removed. I'm just going to read the tweet from the Blue Jays. Update, outfielder George Springer was removed from tonight's game with a left-hand contusion. He underwent precautionary imaging that was negative for a fracture. So that's great. I don't know if he's going to play today against the Yankees. Maybe they hold him out for precautionary reasons because of the imaging that he just underwent. But if he's good, that's awesome. I just feel for Springer because, you're turning it around and then you get injured like this. Oh, other thing, Jordan Romano, because things keep getting worse for the Blue Jays. When things look good, they somehow get worse. Jordan Romano had a setback with his rehabbing. So this is from Ben Nicholson Smith. Jordan Romano has been shut down after experiencing elbow discomfort while throwing yesterday per manager John Schneider. Romano will visit Dr. Meister with next steps determined from there. Romano, 30. I'll read directly from Sportsnet. Romano, 31, has only played in 13 innings of action in 2024, with injuries setting him back from replicating a stellar 2023 campaign that witnessed the Markham, Ontario native register a career-high 36 saves. It's been a series of disasters on top of disasters on top of disasters for the Toronto Blue Jays. And the Romano news is just another pile on to that giant pile of dirt disaster that's been the 2024 Toronto Blue Jays. We will see how things go with the Yankees today. Maybe they pick up a win and they can get a series win against the Yankees, which will be cool, but it's going to take a miracle at this point for this team to fight their way back to a playoff spot. We need to start compiling our lists of what we want at the trade deadline and who needs to go out. Kikuchi's at the top of that. Let's keep filling up the list of who needs to be traded and what needs to come back for these Blue Jays, because this season it's a write-off at this point. Let's retool for 2025. You move on from the GM this offseason, bring in the new GM to make the team a lot better for next year. I think that's where we're sitting at right now, which is awfully disappointing, but we'll be following along with our fingers crossed that miracles can happen for this team this year. That's it for me today. Thank you for being here. You could be anywhere in the world, shows watching or listening this right now, and I appreciate you. The NHL is wacky season right now. We're going to be following that. Check out a new Steve Dangle podcast on Monday. Go to the SDPN YouTube channel. Steve Dangle's doing some reactions to all the NHL news. Check it out there. I will see you again very shortly. Take care.
And that is how it's done.
The Jesse Blake Sports Report with Jesse Blake.
Jesse Blake, the guy that likes to hear his name twice in one sentence. Sure, I know him. No, he doesn't have an ego.